Job satisfaction? Well, I guess you have it some of the time, but I sure wish I knew how to keep it.
What is job satisfaction to me? I would say a feeling of accomplishment combined with a low stress level.
When I think about job satisfaction, I think about my paycheck at the end of the week.
You know you haven't accomplished what you want to accomplish at the end of the day when you feel like you've been spinning your wheels, phone calls go unanswered, decisions are left unmade.
Continual interruptions, maybe not being as organized as I'd like to be, just day-to-day, frenetic, hectic things going on.
On this ITS project, it's a rush.
In Search of Job Satisfaction, a lecture by Klaus Hilgers based on principles and practices of the Hubbard Management System.
Hi, my name is Klaus Hilgers. You and I are going to go on an exploration together, and we're going to look at this question of what is job satisfaction? Where does it come from? How do we get it? And how do we keep it? Now, given the fact that we spend 70% of our waking hours on the job, it is very important for us to know how we can actually improve the quality of our working life. Now, in order to do this, we're going to look at a real basic question, which is, well, what do we get paid for? Now, some people think they get paid for putting in time, and you can tell these people pretty quickly, because if you listen to them talk every day, they say things like, oh, another 15 minutes and I can take a break. Or 2 more hours till the end of the day and I can get on with my life. Or some people, I mean, they're in a situation where it's like 2 years, 3 months, and 4 hours until I can retire. Now, my question to you is, are these people really experiencing job satisfaction? Or are they doing time? Now, to look at this question, we want to know what is our product that we're producing. We're really looking at the question of what is our valuable final product. And that's what we're going to define right now. A valuable final product is something that can be exchanged with other activities in return for support. It could as easily be named a valuable exchangeable product. Now, it would seem obvious that people would know what their product is, or a business would know what its product is. But just to give you an example of what different types of products can exist, I'm going to tell you a little story. I did a speech at the International Racket Sports Association, and basically what we had was owners of health clubs there. And one of the questions I asked them is, well, what is your valuable final product? And one of the executives afterwards told me it was the loudest blank that he had ever heard in his entire life. Most of the people did not know what their product actually is. Now, some of them thought they were in the business of health, and some of them thought they were in the business of fitness, but they weren't really sure. And when we finally got down to it and really looked at what their product is, what we discovered was that the product really was a satisfied member participating at the club and referring new members. Now, if those 3 things were happening, we knew we were achieving our product. They were really in the business of participation, not necessarily in the business of health. Because some people go not for health, they go for social reasons. Some of them go for other types of reasons. But so this notion of what is your valuable final product is crucial, because if you don't know it, when you organize yourself, you may be making a big mistake. Now, let's look at another growing industry, prisons. Now, when I worked with the Department of Corrections up in Vermont, we had a strategic planning meeting, and one of the questions we were looking at is, well, what is actually our valuable final product? Now, when we asked the different groups within the organization, the guards thought it was no escapes. The people who are, let's say, in education thought everybody should at least have a GED. The administrators wanted to make sure that the person at least did their time. And so we had all these different points of view on what the product actually is. Now, after all our discussions, we finally came down to one product. And the product we came up with is a law-abiding citizen. That's what we're looking for. Somebody who goes through the system, comes out, has now in fact been corrected, and will now be a law-abiding citizen. Now it's interesting because once you see that it's your product, everybody's viewpoint changes. The guard now has to look from how do I interact with this particular prisoner in order for them to become a law-abiding citizen. Now, if they happen to escape, you'll notice they're not a law-abiding citizen, are they? So they still have to make sure that they stay there to complete their term and their sentence. But again, once we've identified the valuable final product, we could then develop programs, develop systems in order to help that person achieve their particular goal of being a law-abiding citizen. The ability to name your product has everything to do with job satisfaction. If you don't know what your product is, how could you get it? And if you are not getting the product, you aren't satisfied. You end up feeling like a hamster who's running around going nowhere. You often see in companies where there's an individual who's somewhere in the middle of this big business, who has this feeling like they're working on some function, but they do not see how that function is related to the end valuable final product. And because they don't see the relationship between that function and the end valuable final product, they feel like their work does not make a difference. They do not experience any satisfaction at all from their job, and they do literally feel like they're just doing time. However, if you do know what your product is and you are organizing yourself to get that product, you now have a chance to experience some satisfaction, and it will show up as better production. So the question you might have now is, well, how can I apply this to my own life? Well, one of the things that you can do is ask yourself this basic question: what is my valuable final product? If you're a receptionist, what is your valuable final product? If you are, for instance, an engineer, what is your valuable final product? In working with Honeywell, one of the things that we did in working in engineering groups is we got people together, and before they started working on their process, what they were supposed to produce, they first asked themselves the question, what is the valuable final product? Discover that, work their way backwards to find out what the whole process was so they in fact could achieve it. So every single person in an organization should know what their valuable final product is, what their department's valuable final product is, what their division's valuable final product is, and what the organization as a whole has for a valuable final product. That is a process that you can do on your own, and just out of doing that, you'll have major realizations, I like to call them ahas, all right? And you will find that you're now actually producing things, and when you produce, you feel better. That is to say, you will experience job satisfaction.
When my company was able to identify and name our valuable final product, what we found was that we were looking into areas that we had never really associated with getting paid, such as ethics, such as delivering to the customer the very best possible service we could deliver. And all of these things we realized were an integral part of our valuable final product. And part of that was happy customers, ethically served, as well as getting paid.
Once we know what our valuable final product is, then what we can do is we can start to manage ourselves in order to achieve our valuable final product. Now, if we look at the word manage in the dictionary, we'll see that it means to conduct, control, direct, handle. That's how we're using the word manage. We're not using it in the sense of where a lot of people think about it as only management manages. The truth of it is everyone manages something. And the key concept here is this word control. And this word control also has gotten a bad reputation, as in, don't you dare control me, and I don't want to be controlled. That is a controlling person. We're not talking about it in that sense. We are actually talking about the anatomy of control. And this is a very key Hubbard management principle that we want to go over now. Control may be subdivided into 3 separate parts. These parts are start, change, and stop. As you can see, a person who can, in fact, start something when they want to start it, change it when they want to change it, and stop it when they want to stop it, would be in control. Start, change, and stop comprise a cycle of action. And when we manage, what we're managing are, in fact, cycles of actions. We're not just managing what we start, we're not just managing what we change, or we're not just managing what we stop. We actually have to manage the whole process, which includes start, change, and stop. Now, if you're not completing cycles of action, that means you're not achieving your valuable final product, which means that you are not getting satisfied. And what happens is job satisfaction goes downhill. Because you've often had the experience called, I feel like I did lots of work today, all right, you're ready to go home, but you feel like underneath it that you really didn't get anything done. And if you really take a look at it, if you feel like you didn't get anything done, what happened was you didn't complete any cycles of action. Now, along with the cycle of action, we're going to look at another basic principle, which is called the conditions of life. And that's called be, do, and have. Now, using these principles, I'm going to ask you some basic management questions. I'm going to ask you some basic things that you know about management, and I'd like to find out and have you take a look at or figure out where these principles fit into the cycle of action. So, for instance, how many of you have heard the expression called people who set goals and work on achieving them are usually more successful than the people who don't? Now, most of us probably have heard that. Now, if you were to draw your 3 circles, which circle would the setting of goals go into? And just write that down. Good. Now I'm going to ask you the next one. Where would action go? Which circle would action go in? And write that down. Good. And now let's take a look at results, and let's see where results would go, and which circle would you put that in? Fine. Now let's ask another one. If you have a good idea, having a good idea, which circle would that go into? And just write that down. Thank you. And now let's take a look at functions. Where do functions go? Good. And now let's take a look at where would a product go? We've been talking about valuable final products. Which of these 3 circles would valuable final products go into? And just write that in there. Thank you. And now let's take a look at the concept called statistics. And a company to be successful should know what its statistics are. And which circle would statistics go into? Good. And now let's take a look at this concept of commitment. Where would commitment go? Good. Now what you can do is to compare what you wrote down versus what we have on our graphic here. In the B realm, or start realm, we have idea, goal, commitment. In the do realm, we have action and function. In the have realm, we have results, product, and statistics. So the basic concept of management is to have a good idea, set a goal for it, get committed to it, and once you are committed to it, that's what it's going to take to get you into action. It's going to allow you to function, and if you're doing the actions and doing the proper functions, it should then produce the result, or you should be producing our valuable final product, which of course is measurable by a statistic. So the idea is to go from from start to change to stop. The speed with which you go from start to change to stop is what's called the rate of production. Now this looks like a simple process, except for that there is one additional piece that's missing. And the piece that's missing is what we call a barrier. Because a lot of times we have good ideas and we have goals, except we never achieve them. Well, why didn't we achieve them? Because we ran into some barrier. Whether it was time, whether it was money, whether it was I don't know how, something, we ran into some barrier that stopped us. Sometimes it's even other people who stop us. But we did run into some barrier. And that's why this whole notion of commitment, of having the intention and determination to get through to the other side, that's why it's required. It is the thing that's going to break us through all those barriers that we may run into. And if we get through those barriers, come out the other side, achieve our valuable final product, complete our cycle of action, we will then experience the satisfaction because we know what we went through in order to do that, and we still achieve the result. Now there is one particular barrier which is a big problem in this whole management process. And that is the barrier that has to do with what prevents us from completing cycles of action. So if we were to take a look at it, what we would see is that people are either completing things or they're doing incomplete work. The biggest problem is that most people do not finish what they start. And if you are not finishing what you start, you end up with what's called an incomplete cycle. Now let's give you the good news and the bad news about an incomplete cycle of action. The bad news is that whenever you have an incomplete cycle of action, it will haunt you forever. The good news is that it'll always give you another chance to handle it. And if you don't handle it the first time, then you get another chance, but then it's a little bit more difficult the second time. And if you don't handle it the second time, the third time, it gets a little more difficult. Now let's give you some examples of that. Have you ever mowed your lawn, right? So here you are, you're mowing your lawn, you're going along, mow your lawn. You're ready to stop, you turn the lawnmower off, you're going to put it away, put it in your garage. You look back over here and you see that you missed this patch of grass. It looks like a Mohican haircut. You say to yourself, no way am I going to start this thing up again. So what do? You go in your house, right? That's it on that. The next morning you get up, you come out of your house. When you come out of your house, what's the first thing you notice? That patch of grass. You go to work, you come back from work. When you come back from work, what do you notice? The patch of grass that you missed. Then, of course, if you're living with someone, what they like to do is they like to point out all your incomplete cycles of action, so they say things to you like, by the way, dear, did you notice that patch of grass that you missed? And so, as you can see, now this patch of grass is starting to haunt you. Let's give you another example. There's a friend of mine who did the wallpaper in his kitchen. He does a great job of wallpaper, and all of a sudden he runs out of wallpaper. There's only one little section left behind the curtain to do. And it doesn't even require a whole roll. Given that he's a little cheap, and given that he didn't want to go run out to the store to get some more, what does he do? He cuts up some snips that were left over, makes it look kind of neat, patches it right behind the curtain, no problem. I come over his house, I go, Harry, nice job of wallpapering. It's really terrific. He goes, yeah, it's really fabulous, except for this one section right here behind the curtain. And so whenever he goes in to that room, he spots that patch. Why? Because it's an incomplete cycle of action. As far as he's concerned, he's now Superman, he's got X-ray vision, he sees right through the curtain. Me, personally, I would never have looked behind the curtain in a million years. But whenever he goes into the room, that's what he sees. So now you start to see how these incomplete cycles haunt you.
Well, by completing cycles of action, you're basically getting work done, and that is really the key to getting your products. One of the things I've noticed that if you have a lot of cycles that tend to backlog on you or back up on you and you just don't get them done, you start to feel overwhelmed, like you're never going to get everything done. And what I found is that just by simply sitting down and finishing some simple cycles of action, the workload doesn't seem so bad anymore. It's actually almost therapeutic.
Now let's take communication as an example. Let's say you're working for someone. So I'm working for Harriet, right? And I've now got a problem with Harriet, and I now want to talk to her about it. But I'm a little nervous about it because it's a little uncomfortable for me to deal with. So what do? I rehearse it for 3 days, finally get enough courage together. Once I have enough courage together, what do? I go in to see Harriet. As I walk into the office to look at Harriet, the first thought that comes to mind, I look at her, my mind goes, this is the wrong time to bring this up. She's not in a good mood. So what do? I now beat around the bush, talk about everything except what's really on my mind. I walk out of her office, and as soon as I walk out of her office, the first thought I have is, why didn't I talk to Harriet about this thing? Then, of course, you have to justify why, so then you immediately come up with a good reason called, it was not the time, and you know timing is everything. And then, of course, you're having lunch, and as you're having lunch over here with Glenn, Glenn all of a sudden happens to mention Harriet's name, and as soon as he mentions Harriet's name, what happens? Your mind immediately goes, yeah, and when are you going to talk to Harriet about this thing? And then what you do is you go home and you're caught in a traffic jam, and while you're in a traffic jam, you're thinking about, I got to do my laundry, I got to clean out the garage, and don't forget to talk to Harriet about that thing. And then you're ready to go to sleep that night, but you're having a little trouble going to sleep, and what happens? You're sitting there, you're laying there actually, and you're having thoughts like, I can't believe this, I got to do this, and I got to do this, and when are you going to talk to Harriet about things? And so you start to see how these incomplete cycles haunt you. And when these incomplete cycles haunt you, you'll notice that your cycles of actions are slowing down, they're stopping, and in some case, you actually even get stuck. And if you're at that point in your life where you feel like you're stuck and nothing's moving, you can probably take a look back and you see that you have a whole bunch of incomplete cycles hanging up. Matter of fact, we had a guy named Ed in one session, and he raised his hand right in the middle of it and he said, I just figured out why I had the worst week of my life. I go, Ed, why? He says, because I just realized I haven't completed one thing all week. So you see the cost that incompletion has on you. Now let's take a look at the flip side, which is what a completion is. Let's start off by looking at the definition. The definition of complete: lacking no parts, whole, total inclusion of all that is needed for the integrity, perfection, or fulfillment of something. Based on this definition, you can see that when something is complete, there's nothing missing. It turned out perfectly the way you wanted it to turn out. It has integrity, meaning that it lives up to a standard. And you have the experience of fulfillment. Now, when you and I are fulfilled, what's the experience? The experience is one of satisfaction. When you complete something, you are satisfied. That's ultimately the test. So if you feel satisfied, then you know you completed something. If you are not experiencing satisfaction on the job, if you are not experiencing satisfaction in a relationship, the problem is that there is some incomplete cycle of action that's hanging around, that's bothering you, that's preventing you from experiencing satisfaction. If you want to get more satisfaction in life, who's it up to? Is satisfaction waiting around some corner waiting to greet you? Or is satisfaction something that you have control over, that you can in fact create? And in fact, you can create it by completing cycles, because when you and I complete something, do it, fully done, finished, it feels great. The problem is a lot of times we don't acknowledge ourselves for having completed those cycles. So when you complete a cycle, if there's nobody else around that says, great job, John, or great job, Glenn, or great job, Mary, you say, great job, Klaus. You acknowledge yourself for having completed that cycle of action. You must take responsibility for creating your own satisfaction. And you can. And all it takes is for you to complete what you start. As you can see, the first experience you have after you complete something is you feel satisfied. Since this is also a cycle of action, it's related to energy. So here's the question: what happens to your energy level when you complete something? Does it stay the same? Does it go up, or does it go down? I think it's pretty obvious. You'll see that your energy level goes up when you complete something. Also, since we're talking about energy, we're also talking about momentum. And when you complete a cycle of action, your momentum also goes up. But true completion is the gateway or doorway to creativity. And when you create, what do you have? You got another new good idea, you turn it into a goal, you get committed to it, you put it into action, and then you produce your product at the end and you complete that cycle, and now you got another opportunity to experience satisfaction. And so you might say that life is this series of completing cycles of action, and the more cycles of action that you and I complete, the more satisfaction we experience, the more things we get done, and we in fact become more powerful as human beings. Now let's take a look at some applications of this information. So there's one part of it which really has to do with you controlling your own cycles, but there's another problem, which of course is that you work with other people. And if you will notice it, everybody's always in the middle of a cycle somewhere, and most of the time what's going on in the organization is everybody's coming in and interrupting you. Whether it's by the phone, they come walking in the door, whatever it is. Some managers seem to be masters. Some, I don't know how they know it. They know I'm just about ready to complete a cycle, and what they want to do is to pull me off it. I need you now. And I'm sure you've had that experience. And you feel like you get interrupted all day. So we want to look at, well, what actually happens when this phenomena occurs. So let's assume I'm working for someone and they give me an instruction that says, Klaus, go over and get me this book. So what I do is I start walking over to get the book, and as I'm ready to get the book, they say, no, never mind, please go back and sit at the computer. So now what I'm ready to do is I walk back over here, I'm ready to sit at the computer, and just as I'm ready to sit down, they go, hold it, never mind, go get the plant. So now what I do is I go to get the plant, and just before I'm ready to touch the plant, they say, no, don't do that. All right, come back over here by the computer. So now I come over here. Now what had just happened to me? What happened was, I got somebody managing me who didn't let me complete any cycles of action. And when I'm not allowed to complete any cycles of action, I get frustrated, I get upset, and besides that, I want to kill my manager. And on top of that, the manager is not getting anything done either. And that's why you feel like a hamster at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier. So that's what's called poor control. It's not allowing someone to complete a cycle of action. Certainly, if your manager's coming along, and if they're conscious about cycles of action, and this is actually just commonly called good manners, is if they're ready to come and see you, if you have a couple more things to do before you're ready to complete it, you can just turn to the person. If they say, I need you now, you say, look, Harry, I just want to complete the cycle. It's going to take me about 2 more minutes. Is that okay with you? Now, if he's a smart manager, what's he interested in? He's interested in completing cycles of action. At which point he says, fine, complete that. Now, if it was an emergency of some kind and the roof were caving in, he would obviously say, no, we got to handle it now. But under normal circumstances, that would be the appropriate thing to do because we want to complete that cycle, and a manager is conscious about completing cycles. Let's take a look and see what impact that this kind of management actually has. And I think it's said brilliantly here in this quote. Only the most violent emergency should pull anyone off a cycle of action, and he should be returned to it when the emergency is handled. Pulling people off jobs is done where an in charge doesn't know what jobs are being done. To completely wreck an area, all one has to do is interrupt all cycles begun. It's a dangerous practice.
Paul, I need you on a project right now. Could you come with me?
Paul, you have Mr. Simmons on line 1. Paul, this is urgent. Paul, are you there?
The weekly plan is another tool that you can use to manage cycles of action. When you manage, you're usually you're managing a cycle of action. Monday could be the beginning of the cycle, and Friday, when you leave at 5 o'clock, could be the end of your cycle. You use your weekly plan to write down what it is you're going to accomplish this week. What targets are you going to achieve? And then, at the end of the week, you can cross them off and you can say, that's it, that week's completed, these are the things that are accomplished, these are the things I need to correct. And then, just as in the cycles of action, that's it on that week, and now let's create the next week, which then starts your next weekly plan. That is another tool for managing cycles of action. Another thing that you can do is you can simply take a pad, title it, My List of Incompletions. Write down all your incompletions, set a target date by when they're going to be done, therefore you're turning it into a target, and then actually get it fully done. When you get it fully done, cross it off and say, good job, and experience some job satisfaction from having completed a cycle of action. That's another tool that you can use as a way to complete cycles. In order to be a powerful person, you do not make it alone. Yes, you complete cycles of action, but you don't do it in a vacuum yourself. You work with others. To become powerful, you only become powerful when you exchange with other people. Now let's take a look at this concept called exchange. And you'll see that when you are doing things for others and others are doing things for you, things tend to work out. But there are 4 types of exchanges. The first kind of exchange is commonly called a rip-off or a con, where someone is getting something for nothing. The next kind of an exchange is called a partial exchange or a poor exchange, where someone is working, let's say, from 9 to 5, but most of the time while they're on their job, they're trying to figure out how to get out of work rather than do the work. Then you've got what's called a fair exchange, where someone is working from 9 to 5, for instance, and is in fact from 9 to 5 working, doing everything they can, looking forward. But at 5:01, they're gone. And then what we have is what's called an abundance of exchange, where you are giving more than what's expected. That's the person who's still around at 6:30, doing the extra. And if you want to become a powerful person, you're going to have to give an abundance of exchange. In everyday business, we call it, it's the value added to our product or service. So what is the extra that you are going to produce? That's the question. How are you going to give an abundance of exchange? And by giving an abundance of exchange, and making sure that you're doing it with others and you can control that totally yourself, that adds to job satisfaction because you feel good when you are doing things for others. And just out of doing it, without even looking for anything in return, you watch, you will get it in return. And because you're giving abundance of exchange, you get promoted, you move on, and you expand as a human being. Well, we're just about ready to complete this cycle of action called the video. So let's summarize. In order to achieve job satisfaction, first of all, you got to have a valuable final product. You've got to be able to name that product. You've got to want that product, and you've got to organize to get that product. There are what's called cycles of action, and you want to be able to manage from start to stop whatever job that you're doing. Because when you complete that cycle of action, you will, in fact, be satisfied. And when you are satisfied and the energy goes up, the momentum goes up, and then you have nothing, and then you can create a new cycle. But let's look at what is the bottom line, and this is the trap. A lot of people are going after job satisfaction. Oh, my morale is not good. If my morale were better, then I'd feel better. Well, the bottom line isn't when your morale gets better, then your production gets better. The bottom line is production creates morale. When you are producing something, your morale goes up. So the name of the game is go after the product, go after completion. And when you are achieving your valuable final product and you are completing things, as a byproduct, what you get is job satisfaction.